Hi again. This is me, and I'd like to talk about this to-do app thing I've been working on for a while. It's kind of been going on for a while now, but I'm having fun, so might as well continue, right? Okay, so far, we have our app, and it creates to-do items, and you can kind of check them off or uncheck them. You can delete them or add new ones. I just recently updated to Xcode 6.3, and I noticed that when I opened the app up, it showed a couple errors, and I think Apple changed a little bit how these optionals work. So instead of using as to assign this, it needs to be as and then explicitly unwrapped. So, it actually gives me the error and then it shows me the fix too. So it just wants to add the exclamation point here. And I noticed this in another project too. So I'm just going to go through and I don't know why it put that there, but I think that's really what it wants. Yeah, there we go, right? So it just wanted to put the exclamation point in. Let's take a quick look here. And so far, the app looks like this. There we go. So there's our app. We can add a new to-do item. Say, apple soup, and then save it. And there's our new to-do, and we can check it off or uncheck it and swipe to delete. Okay? So we can also edit and rearrange the items, right? So that looks pretty good so far, right? So what I'd like to do in this next couple videos here is I'd like to add a detail screen. Okay, so you'll tap on a to-do item and it'll show you details about that to-do. Notice that let's test that again. In this app, tapping on a row activates the check mark. So if we're going to tap to go into details, then we're going to have to change this functionality, right? So you might want to keep this, in which case you don't want maybe to use the detail screen. But if you want the detail screen, we might have to give this up and have another system for setting the check mark there, okay? So anyway, so that said, let's go on. So our first step here is to create a new view controller in Storyboard. So I'm going to go into Storyboard here, and this is my add to do view controller. Let's add another view controller. So I'll just drag view controller into the view here, and I'll just make it the smaller size. And then in this view controller we'll add a text field for the name and a text field for the note, and then we'll size these. And I won't do the styles or the constraints here because we already kind of covered that previously, so I'll leave that for you to do, so on your own, right? But we'll make it look like this one when we're done. So anyway, so we got our stuff here. This, since it lets you edit a to-do, I'm going to include an extra UI element, and this will be a UI switch, and this will show you the state of the to-do, like the completed state, right? So I'll put this in here with a label, and then we'll label it completed, okay? And if you check the switch, if it's on, then it's completed, and if it's not on, then it's not completed, right? So we got our view set up, and what I want to do is create a view controller for this view, right? So let's make a new iOS source Cocoa Touch class, and I've got UI view controller here, and let's call it detail view controller. So I'll save this into my folder here. And there it is. Let me move it up here just underneath Add to Do View Controller, right? And then what we'll want to do is we'll want to assign this to the view here. So I'll select this view in Storyboard, switch to the Identity Inspector, and in the class name we'll type in Detailviewcontroller. Okay, done. Okay, so that looks pretty good so far. So let's do one more thing. So I want this thing, this cell, and actually, all the cells, to link to this view. So what I'm going to do is control drag from this cell into the view and choose Show. Okay, so now we get a segue here. And if I test my app, I can click on a cell and then it takes me to the view here, right? Okay, so that's working pretty good. And then now, actually what I want to do is when I tap on that, I want to populate the fields here with data from, the to-do item that belongs to that cell, right? So let's edit both Detailviewcontroller and Storyboard. So I'm going to open up Detailviewcontroller, Option click on Storyboard to open it in the Assistant Editor, and then we'll make some connections. So I'm going to control drag from the text field here into Detailviewcontroller, and we'll call this name text. And let's do it again. So this one will be note text. And then we'll need one for the switch. So I'll control drag here and call this completed switch. How about that? That's pretty descriptive, right? And so that works pretty good, right? And so let's do one more thing. If you go into this view, we'll have a back button. So if you want to cancel, you can get back to here. But if you want to make some changes and save those changes, why don't we put a save button in this upper right corner there? So I'll scroll down on the list here and find a UI bar button item. And I'll drag it in here and drop it. Oh, can't drop it there. So let's add a navigation item first. And so now we've got our navigation item. Now we'll grab the UI bar button item and drop it on the right side. And then I'll select it and set the identifier to save. Okay, so it'll say save. And so we'll tap that when you want to save the changes here. Okay, so if we want to, recognize when this button is tapped and do something, we'll add an action for it. So I'm going to make a little space here, and then I'll control drag from the save button into my Detailviewcontroller class and make a new action. We'll make sure to switch the connection type to action here, and we'll say save button tapped. And I'm just going to set the type here to UI bar button item for fun. Okay. And there we go. So now we got all our connections here. Now we just need to pass the data in here, and then this class will have the capability to fill out these fields, set the state for the button, and recognize when you tap on the button up in the upper right. Okay. So how do we do that? Well, in order for this class to recognize when you have a to-do item, right, or recognize a to-do item, we'll have to pass that to-do item here, and it'll store it in a variable. So I'm going to make a variable up here called to-do, and I'll type it as to-do item. Okay, so you'll have to set this. So how do we set it? Well, when you're in ViewController here, you're going to tap on one of the cells, and now it's going to take us to the detail view controller, right, or to the detail view. So what we want to do is I'm going to find this function here called TableView did select row at index path, and currently this one shows or hides the checkmark accessory. And like I said, if we're using the detail view, the checkmark isn't really going to work for us. So I'm going to comment out all the code in here. We can just leave this, or you could delete the whole function. I'm going to leave this here in case I want to reference it later. But we want to get rid of this for now. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is go to Storyboard, find the segue here that links this table view cell with the new detail view, and it's this segue here. I can see it selects that button and it points at this view. So let's give this an identifier. Okay, so I'm going to select the segue here, and I'll call it how about detail segue, something like that. I don't know what's a good name. Yeah, let's call it, I guess, detail segue sounds pretty good. So I'll call it detail segue, and then we'll go back to ViewController, right? And there's a method in here somewhere called prepareForSegue. And if you don't have it, you could make this method, but if you were following the tutorial, this one should be in there, right? So it says prepareForSegue. So when we prepareForSegue, it's going to give us a segue, and then we can access the identifier to figure out which segue it is. So in this case, we've got an if statement in here that recognizes when it's the to-do segue, right? The add to-do segue. So let's put an else on here, say else if, and I want to say else if segue dot identifier equals detail. Did I spell degway? Wait, let's go fix that. Let me go back here. There's no reason you can't go back and fix things. That's my bad spelling there. Oh wait, let's make that uppercase. And then you know what, just to make sure we get it right here, I'm going to copy the name and then go back to ViewController here and paste it. There we go, detail segue. So, if the segue identifier is detail segue, then, we're going to do the code in here. Okay? So what we want to do is we want to get the destination view controller. We'll just do it the same way we did up here. Destination view controller, and we'll say, okay, that's segue dot destination view controller. And we want to get this one as a detail view controller, because we know if it's the detail segue, we're going to a detail view controller, right? And then I want to say destination view controller, right? Because that's a reference to this detail view controller here. And I know that you have a to-do property, right? And so we want to set that equal to the currently selected to-do item, okay? So we need to get that to-do item. Let's do that. Let's actually put it here. So let's say, let's actually get the index path first. So we'll say let index path equal TableView dot what is it? Index path for selected row. So your table view always remembers which row you tapped on. So when I tap a row, and then later I can ask the segue, I can ask the table view, like, hey, table view, what's the index path for the selected row? And it returns that index path to me, right? So now I can get the to-do item for that index path from our array by saying array index path dot row. Okay, now this is very similar to how we're getting the data down here in cell for row at index path, right? It's a little bit, it's actually exactly the same. It's just a little different in that, we have to ask the table view for the selected row, and down here they just give you the index path, right? It's the same idea though. Every row in the table view is tied to an element in our array based on its index path.row. Okay, so this is giving me an error, and it's saying, essentially like when you ask for the selected row, this function is going to return an optional. It's saying like maybe none of the rows are selected, so I'm going to return a nil to you, right? And we can check that with the option key. If I option and click on this, you can see it says, function index path for selected row returns an NS index path question mark, right? So that question mark means that this is an optional. It might, in other words, it might return an index path or it might return a nil. So let's rearrange this a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap it in an if. I'm going to say if let index path equal table view index path for selected row. And then the difference here is going to be that if index path for selected row returns a nil, then this will be considered false and we'll skip over the code here. And if it returns a good value, then we'll do the code inside here, and then we don't have that little error anymore, okay? And we have a little error checking, so if this didn't return a value for some reason, then our program won't crash because this will be nil, right? So anyway, so we've got that worked out. And so now, whenever we're going to go to use a segue to go to another scene, if it goes to the details screen, then we're going to get the current to-do item for the currently selected row and pass it to the to-do value or the to-do variable of the Detailviewcontroller. And if I look at Detailviewcontroller, that's going to be, this variable right here. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to add a new function inside Detailviewcontroller, right? So inside Detailviewcontroller, I'm going to add viewWillAppear, okay? So viewWillAppear is a method that's called every time this view is about to appear on the screen, okay? So anytime I want to set stuff up so things happen before you see the view, every time that view is going to show up, we can put it inside this function. This is a little different than Viewdidload because Viewdidload only gets called, once when the view is loaded, right? The first time it's built. But you might show the view the first time and then leave and then come back. And in that case, Viewdidload is only really called one time, even though you might see this view show and hide and reappear, any number of times. Viewdidload though, or viewWillAppear though, is going to be called every time the view appears, right? So what we want to do is when our view appears, we want to say like, hey, name text equals, to-do name, right? So we're going to get the name from the to-do item and put it into the name field. And maybe note text equals, to-do note, right? And then for our completed, since this is a UI switch, it has a property called on. And if you set on to true, then the switch is on. And if you set on to false, the switch is off, right? So we'll say, completed switch dot on equals to do dot completed, right? So if it's completed, the switch will be on. If it's not completed, the switch will be off. And there we go. So let's give that a try. So I'll tap this to play here, or test, or build, or whatever that button is. And here's our view, and I'm going to click on this hello world, and now it says hello world completed. It must be false, right? Let's turn that on, and then we'll go back, right? And then if I click on this one, you can see it says foo and bar, so that's working. Right, and so that's working pretty good. Our thing though is now if you edit eat lunch, if I change this to like eating lunch, and then I save it, and nothing happens, right? So we got to work on the save button next. Okay, so what do we do with the save button? So our save button is right here in the IB action, and what we want to do is when you save the data, what we want to do is we want to update our to-do item. So if you tap save, we'll say to-do.name equals name text.text. So it's kind of the opposite of what we did here. So here we got the values from the to-do item and set them as the text of the text field. And up here, we're getting the value from the text field and setting it as the property of the to-do item. Let's do it again for note. And also for completed. Okay, so there we go. And then the last thing we'll do is when you tap on this, we also want to return to the other view, right? Because we don't want to have to tap save and then also tap back, right? That would be kind of silly, right? If you saved, you probably are all done and you want to go back anyway. So what we'll do is every view controller also has an optional value of a navigation controller. So if you're embedded in a navigation controller, then this property will be true, and it'll have a value which will be the reference to the navigation controller, right? So let's reference our navigation controller, and what I want to do is I want to say navigation controller pop view controller animated. So the views are held in, they call it a stack. Essentially, it's kind of a list of views. And if you push a view controller onto the stack, you're going to the next view. And if you pop a view controller off the stack, you're removing the last view controller from the stack and going to the previous one. So if you think about a history, if you pop one, you're going back in history. And if you push one, you're adding a new item to the history, right? So what I want to do is I want to go back in history to the previous view. So I'm going to say pop view controller animated, and the animated is just a true or false to say whether the transition to the previous view should be animated. So I'll just set it to true, and let's give it a try. So here's my view. I'm going to change this from hello to hello world. Then I'll say world hello here, and we'll call that completed. And then I'll click save, and then we go back. Oh, but then it's not edited, right? Let's click it again. Oh, it still remembers the data, right? But it doesn't show it updated here. Maybe it'll show it if I do that. Oh yeah, there it is, right? Oh, it got the check mark too. So what happened there? Well, whenever we leave a view and come back, right, the view really doesn't get redrawn from scratch because it already existed. So in View Controller, that the table view is already in its state, and it doesn't update the cells automatically, right? Unless like when I drag the table view up, it removed one of the cells, and then when I brought it back down again into view, it added that cell back on the list, and then it redrew it. So, essentially what we need to do is we need to tell the table view to refresh or reload its data from scratch when we return to this view controller from the detail view, right? Because we might have changed changed the data in one of the to-do items. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the Viewdidload function. So I'm in View Controller, and I'm going to add in the viewWillAppear method again, just like we used it in Detailviewcontroller. Okay? And really, what I should have done in the other one, and I'll do it in this one, is I should have done super viewWillAppear animated. Okay? So, whenever you call a function that is one of the default functions that's built into View Controller and you're overriding it, you should call that same function inside your super class. So I should have done this in the other one. I'll add that in later, right? But anyway, when viewWillAppear, we'll say TableView.reload data. Okay, so now anytime we come back to this view, it'll refresh the list right, in case we changed some of the items in the list. And then if I go back to Detailviewcontroller, I'll find viewWillAppear and add super viewWillAppear animated. Okay, and essentially, the animated property comes in, and then we're going to just pass that value on to the super class, right, when we call this. So let's give that a quick test. And we'll change eating lunches, and we'll make it true, and then I'll save it. And then it says eating lunches, and this one's updated. Okay, so it looks like everything's working here. And there we go. We'll call that a wrap there. I'll save this and upload it to my GitHub file in case you want to look at my work. Okay, thanks for watching.